Hello, hello, and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to Wisdom Exchange Live 3, where we will be exploring the topic of finding your other half, but not in the way that you think. So, we're going to start today in the Levant. So, hope you can all see my screen. And it's going to be 9750 BC in the Levant, which is around 11,773 years ago. Here, the sun rose over an undivided continent, heating up the landscape of large cats, rhinos, and mammoths. A band of Homo sapiens and their species had emerged onto the scene almost 300,000 years ago. So the hunter-gatherer tribe had journeyed north over thousands of years. If you remember last time, we visited the gorge in Tanzania, and they journeyed north, settling in the Levant's fertile landscape, nested between the Nile estuaries and the ancient Euphrates River. And so the landscape was really a luscious landscape. They had lots of beasts, berries, and before they started building things. However, meanwhile, the glaciers of the Younger Dryas period had advanced in Earth's geological age, and so this meant the cooling of the Earth was occurring, leaving behind a dry and colder landscape, so the Homo sapien tribe could not really sustain such high numbers with dwindling resources. So they hunted like smaller game. They started a semi-sedentary lifestyle just because they couldn't find so much game. And most curious of all, they experimented with plant seeds. So instead of eating the plant seeds directly, the Homo sapien hunter-gatherer tribe would start to plant the seeds in the soil. Sorry, I just have a break timer. And so, unknowing to them that the Earth was in the last stage of the Pleistocene epoch, awaiting the Holocene. And the Holocene is the geological age of the Earth that we're in right now. And the epoch is that timestamp. It was the last age of the Pleistocene epoch. And so this was around the time that the first Homo sapien civilization was occurring, the Natufian period. And that emerged where a historical shift from hunter-gatherer tribes, like we came from in Tanzania, to the agricultural revolution started to begin. So this is really a fantastic setting to explore the different psychologies and skill sets working together in the Levant on Earth to really survive in a tribe and thrive. And last time, we were talking about this in Tanzania in the gorge, but now we are starting another shift. Not when we just became Homo sapiens and started to survive in that changing landscape in Tanzania, but now again because of the Earth's conditions, we're in the Levant starting the agriculture revolution. So how did our different psychologies help here? And what does that mean for nowadays, our different psychologies, and how can we understand about ourselves, the way our brains function, to help us in our lives as well? So, if we think about it, we're in the Levant, the tribe's resources are dwindling. We're going to need a lot of psychological help here. Homo sapiens, over the thousands of years moving up, they have developed many tools. They've had a lot of medicinal understanding about different plants and leaves, and presumably many generations have already been in the Levant. So they've really understood the topography, the geography, the good understanding of the landscape, the stream and turns of the bends, which plant to eat, which plant is good for when you're feeling like this. And so there's probably good understanding of a multitude of things. At the same time, there probably needed to be a lot of understanding of social politics, so the politics between people, the different tribes, how to keep the calm, how to keep the peace, how to share resources effectively so everyone can survive. So you can see a lot of intelligences going on in the human mind. The intrapersonal, understanding yourself, your emotions, the regulation. Interpersonal, between family members, brother, sister, husband, son, daughter, grandparents, cousins, between the different tribes, and ultimately maybe even between the different civilizations later on. And in addition to that, the intelligence behind making the stone tools, the intelligence behind predicting like the seasons, how the game is going to go, and of course the body intelligence and the sensory information almost, not just knowing about the different plants, but to hunt game, to have that focus and attention to chase the game. So a lot of mental processing going on, and really drawing upon all personality types to survive. So let's go into this a bit deeper. If you're interested in psychology and really understanding the human potential, there's a great guy called Ian McGilchrist. So now you've got understanding of the Levant and what that landscape was like between the ancient Euphrates and Cairo. Ian McGilchrist is a psychiatrist, writer, former Oxford literary scholar, and he made a really good book, The Master and His Emissary. I started reading that actually, and the divided brain and the making of the Western world. And it's really interesting. So, as we explored last time, during our mental processes and meditation and understanding the brain's different mental processes with our attention, we can then see how the brain starts to construct society as a reflection of the different states inside. And of course, each civilization is a reflection of its people as well. So let's dig a bit deeper what Ian McGilchrist was saying and how we can fit that into the landscape for Homo sapiens. So he's talking about this divided brains are far more complex and remarkable than just a simple left right brain split, but it's important to delve into this. So, on one side of the brain, I believe this is the left side of the brain. If you have, for example, a stroke on one side and you're only operating on the other side, you'll have narrow, sharply focused attention to detail, but a bit over attention to detail. And so the extreme can happen in this phenomenon where the sufferer may fail to acknowledge that the existence of their left half of their body, because remember the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and the vice versa, the right brain to the left side. And you can also see in civilizations who are a bit more one brain facing than the other about their rigidity and their attention to detail and precision, and almost like their time. So you'll notice in some business studies they'll talk about like polychromatic cultures and monochromatic cultures. So like Germany and Switzerland, they'll be very punctual. I think Japan as well. Then you get the polychromatic culture. So traditionally places in the global south, like your South America, your Mediterranean countries, maybe even some places in India, and all seeing that the civilizations can be affected or as a direct actual result of our human brain. So again, understanding our hunter-gatherer origins and understanding our mental processing and which way we are leaning, we can then understand how that plays out in reality. In a small life setting, whether we go about our daily routines or in a big scale, like the relationships between different cultures. And so then we also have the other side of the hemisphere. So this is more sustained. So if you think about sustainability, long-term approach, not too much and exploitive in nature, um, broad, open, but maybe more creative, vigilant, and has that real alertness. So it has that openness, that receptivity, and again, not sticking with the genders, masculine or feminine, but more of the philosophical concepts of the masculine, like in Indian nature or yin and yang, that more masculine and feminine balance. So again, like in Sikh philosophy, like you have that miri piri, that masculine, feminine. And so people who live their right hemispheres have a pathological narrowing of their window of attention. So it's quite interesting to actually see when people have a stroke that people who are more on the open side will view the life much more colorfully, and everything is very interconnected and almost like a spiritual person would describe it, whereas person who'd have maybe a stroke on the other side is more very rigid, and they even fail to acknowledge the entire side of their body. So you can imagine how people could box things, and while it's good for executing and creating tasks, they can label things, box them off, and yeah, have a degree of ignorance. So really, going now that we've understand these two sides a bit, and also the interplay between these, about imagination and reason. So we're seeing that for imagination and reason, you need both hemispheres because they interplay with each other, and it's having that perfect balance of the imagination and reason. And so you have, your Sherlock Holmes who can understand complex problems and solve about them. And then you also have like, John Lennon from the Beatles, who they have such intricate poetics and amazing understanding of human nature. Um, and then, of course, like Einstein said, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. So if you remember the book I mentioned a few minutes ago from Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, that also echoes two things like the yin yang, miri piri, intuitive, rational, and like Einstein mentioned, the master, so the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. So that openness, that more creative aspect, um, and then you'll have that more masculine energy, that doing energy. The rational service is the rational mind is a faithful servant. So what he meant by this is not to get caught up in the doing, or we can see like in a world nowadays, like for global warming or um, exploitation of resources, or for example, colonialism. The mind gets very fixated on a goal and to exploit something or to achieve a purpose without having um, the disidentification with the doing. And so that's why I think Einstein was saying the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. So really that openness, that identification with the thoughts, whereas then using the rational mind, that that focused mind as the servant and not getting carried away. So that seems to run through all the philosophies, and it's really interesting that we can delve into this in a psychological point of view. So you're ready to go a bit deeper? So maybe before we go into personality types and things, I think it would be interesting and cool to not just talk about this stuff so our logic mind can understand the information, but maybe to have a degree of awareness of our own mind. So we can do a slight awareness exercise, and I'll show you how we can go into our mind and start to, especially if you're not in touch with your emotions so much. I notice in my work when I do like the meditation exercises every week, there's a lot of ladies coming to it as opposed to men. And it's a well-known fact. It's how to say, a stereotype that women are more in touch with their emotions. So let me just show you what Einstein meant, or at least what I think he meant. So if you close your eyes and just notice where your attention is now in the silence, and just notice that when you close your eyes and notice where your attention is now that you're kind of dropping into a different world where you're kind of shutting off the external world and you're exploring the internal world. And if you've never done that before, there's actually a level of depth and complexity. And so if I get you to now, just with your attention, put your attention to your sense of hearing and the sounds that are closest to you, but not holding on to any sounds in particular. And then putting your attention to sounds that are farther away and not holding anything in particular. And then just with your attention coming back to center, with your eyes still closed. And see you sort of start to, your attention is sort of internalized then, and you're sort of being able to put your attention places, but not get carried away with sights or sounds or smells. And now if I ask you with your eyes closed just to bring any thoughts forward that may be more critical in nature, like you should be doing this, or you should be doing that, or I need to do this, or I can't do this. And noticing any thoughts or feelings associated with that part. And then not identifying with the part, but just noticing it's a thought or a feeling. And then coming back to center. So again, we just visited our sense of hearing in the awareness exercise, and notice how our attention was holding the space for the sounds to come in, but we weren't necessarily attached to the sounds. So it's like who was listening to the sounds. So we could actually place our attention places. So it's not like the attention has a mind of its own. But of course, when we're not meditating, the attention can ping pong everywhere with a tennis ball. But when we're meditating, we can actually have a degree of control of the attention, and the intention's not controlling us. So what, you can open your eyes now. So what I said there about the attention not controlling us, you can see now the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and a rational mind is a faithful servant. So then noticing these thoughts arising, you can start to see how if you're to identify with that critical thought, that part of the subconscious, or other parts that are feeling anxious or trapped, if you're always identifying with these parts, then you're going to play things out in reality. Groups will play things out. Civilizations will play things out without ever being aware. They'll always be ignorant of that. And so they're so identified with a thought or feeling in their subconscious that it plays out in the reality. So that is how psychology, meditation, awareness, how they're all linked. And we start to notice these different thoughts, feelings, and emotions arising, and the difference between the intuitive mind, which is the self that sits behind the attention, and then the rational mind, which is really that driving force, but not to get caught up in. So you can feel as well yourself being calmer. So that's also like you're bringing more awareness into your body, because again, often we're always either in the office and we're like in the Levant, right? We're always connected to nature. We're stimulated by nature. We're grounded by nature. We're in a natural setting. But nowadays in our office and with tons of emails, the human brain is not used to that input, and it can't relax. Because I remember watching a documentary recently with Chris Hemsworth, the actor for Thor, going on a hike, and then showing in a office environment versus a hiking environment in the nature, and I think it was New Zealand or Australia, and noticing the brain patterns was so much more clearer in the natural environment, but they were so so much interference, and they can't think properly in the office environment. So it really restricts the mind. So now went through from the Levant and Tanzania to the Levant with Homo sapiens, and then understanding now how the Homo sapien brain is constructed. And of course, it's not just us; it's also other animals, and that interplay and that higher level of logical thinking, the rational mind, the higher level of creativity, imagination, ration, and logic, um, that that probably other species don't have, um, that we actually have as Homo sapiens. So now you think, okay, that's pretty complex, but it's about to get even more complicated, right? Because every Homo sapien turns out differently. We all have a unique psychological expression, and that gift is personality. So personality is quite interesting because you wake up every day and you're not a new person, right? You're pretty much the same person, kind of the same temperament, same personality. Of course, you can slip into depressions, and so that temperament can become moods, and moods can become. But we're not going to talk about that right now, the habits and moods. We're going to be talking about our personality. And so it's useful to know, okay, the logical people might be like, you can't box me in. But just now understanding that um, we do have a certain spectrum that we exist in psychologically, and that we turn up every day. And there is strengths and weaknesses. So a lot of the wise people, successful people you'll see will be really putting their time, energy, and attention into really their gift set and understanding their gift set. And, if you come from an immigrant background and you see all these A's in a report card and one B, they'll be like, why did you get a B? Focus on your B. But actually, the wise things to do, while it's good to help be a balanced person, well-rounded person, and work on your weaknesses, of course, is really actually to find your unique skill set, um, and really grow that. And of course, you grow that yourself. But some of the work is also to what is your unique skill set? What is your personality? And there's so many tools. So I rambled a bit about that. So let me not bore you any further. Let us delve into personality yet again with some different models. So again, there's a spectrum. It's very hard to map these things logically, but you have the big five, which is more scientifically validated, I believe, than Myers-Briggs personality test that we covered in, I think it was Wisdom Exchange Live 1, or number 2. You can go back and watch that. But really, the personality. So, how can we really understand ourselves? How can we leverage these strengths? and how can we become good, you know, maybe unconsciously incompetent or unconsciously competent, to really conscious of our skill set, from good to great, and from great really trying to get, outmaster, um, what, outclass ourselves. Because when we find ourselves in a field that we're not naturally gifted in, we have to work very hard. But if we find ourselves in a field that we love and that we're gifted in, we're going to naturally outclass people. Okay, we're not being so competitive here that we want to, beat people and stuff, but just to understand that if we want to contribute in the best way possible to society, and live our life in the best way and achieve success, and not just necessarily material success, but also success in the sense that you're expressing your personality in the best way, then really finding that place. So look at MBTI. Even post your MBTI Myers-Briggs results below. I'm very curious that people who watch this, what kind of MBTI are you? And so the big five personality traits. Let's start with openness. So it's the degree of intellectual curiosity, creativity, and preference for novelty. So if someone's ideating all the time, they're traveling all the time, they're very inventive, they're very curious. Think about Elon Musk, maybe Michelangelo, the great artists, the great inventors. They're very, very open and curious. Then you'll have the other side of the spectrum, which is more cautious, more consistent. And both of these have pros and cons, and it's good to delve into one another. But when you're in a workplace or an environment that the culture is such, or the job structure is such, where you're in that pond, let's say, that's wanting you to be in such a more maybe cautious and consistent way, like maybe in quality management, when you're more of an inventive or curious person, or maybe you're in like an entrepreneurial space where you really have to be like artistic and creativity, but you have that more consistent and cautious approach, then you can see how you can maybe change role and really bring your expression, your kind of divine natural skill set. Then we'll go to conscientiousness. So that's tendency to be organized, dependable. So some people are efficient, organized, very militarized. Some people are more easygoing, careless. So, in MBTI, when you have that P at the end, like ENFP, ISFP, that P trait, they tend to be more easygoing and careless. And that's good. They're spontaneous, they're less rigid. But of course, we need to have that balance in our normal lives. But if, again, you'll find yourself tending to one another, and then building a life and supporting your life and job situations and goals that are conducive to your personality type. Extroversion, right? Your tendency to seek the company of others and talk. So some people more solitary and reserved, and the really quiet power of that. Some people are great leaders. They can observe, they can reflect, they can understand the strategy, you know, like in a war scenario or in a company scenario, really understanding the strategy of maybe the financial market or the business development strategy, and making and not putting their energy into um, talking to people so much, but really ideating on this and predicting the future in that sense, in a business way or maybe in a social context way. Whereas you have extroversion, the outgoing and energetic. And right now, the way our society is in, we do value that a bit more. You'll see in advertising and stuff, people tend to be more outgoing, energetic, and that's just one of the traits. I myself are a bit more on the extroverted spectrum kind of sides, and so knowing how your energy is, how to manage your energy, that can also be very helpful. Agreeableness, so measuring of one's own uplifting and helpful nature, friendly, compassionate. So think about your nurses, when you're a doctor, a carer, any job role requiring friendly and compassionate, and then you're challenging and detached. You really want a degree of disagreeableness. If you're a CEO or you're that kind of nature. Not saying that CEOs can't be compassionate or friendly, but the degree of compassion, the degree of detachment, how to set your boundaries, and then as a balanced person, knowing how when you're in a scenario that doesn't really fit the conduciveness to your personality type, that let's say energetically it doesn't fit that vibe of your personality, knowing how to slide into that spectrum of, let's say, setting your boundaries if you're more of a friendly, compassionate person versus, trying to be a bit more friendly and compassionate if you're a very detached and challenging person, if you're a doctor delivering some news, you don't want to be too detached. You want to be a bit compassionate and friendly. And lastly, neuroticism. It's worth seeing as well in some of these traits. Different cultures exhibit different spectrum in general, which is quite interesting when you look at the relationships between cultures and also some of the genders as well. So different between males and females, they're predisposed. And like we looked at in the Levant, because in the landscape, we think about the different roles they had and how we evolved. You can see why these traits were more developed or more prioritized in one gender of Homo sapiens than the others, and that helped in the survival, especially in the disagreeableness. So men in general will be more disagreeable than women, and so neuroticism. So there's a predisposition to psychological distress. So some people are more sensitive, they're more nervous, but that sensitivity could be good. Maybe they're more sensitive to their emotions. Other people are more secure and confident, um, so they have that security and confidence, but maybe they might not have that degree of sensitivity. So they might be going in the world and achieving, their goals, but maybe they're not too sensitive. Where other people maybe be a bit more of a counselor mentality, or you'd think of that wise old shaman in the Native American or pagan or Chinese or Indian tribes or Aboriginal tribes, African tribes, these more sensitive to the nature and things like that. And again, you can see all these things crop up with the MBTI. You have your NF types and your diplomats. You have your NT types with your analysts, etc. So understanding these different psychological ways of the human brain, understanding how they all interplay, then you can start to see how now in the Levant, how there's a reality now that the earth is changing in the climate, and all these personalities in a way have to be very in the moment, attentive, understanding their unique skill sets and leveraging their skill sets to unify and work together to survive and thrive. So really cool to find that. And how do they all work towards one purpose? How do they all find a balance when some things seem in conflict and in paradox? And that comes again back to Ian McGilchrist's work and Einstein's thing about noticing all these natural thoughts and emotions occurring inside of us that our personality prioritizes in terms of input, processing, and output. And then, noticing what our strengths are, noticing what other strengths are, and in a more intuitive way, um, able to work on that and not being too identified, and then naturally finding our path and not forcing any other personality type into certain paths as well. So that's the level of understanding, of wisdom, of awareness, of light we should we can aspire to have, both in ourselves and, of course, in other humans as well, with our attention. So yeah, that was just the infographic. So now let's go into more of a transactional analysis by Eric Bernier. I believe this was in the 60s, so it's a bit dated, but it's worth to look at. So the basics of transactional analysis is your different ego states. So like it's said again, like we can watch our ego, our ruminating mind, and we can watch the games people play with each other, the different transactions. So if you're familiar, if you're an engineer, or if you're a programmer, if you're a scientist into physics, you'll like that, transactions and how, different current flows and how transactions occur with each other. So I don't want to relate humans to computers, but it's helpful to at least have an awareness of this, but not living your mind in that rational state of, hey, what transactions occurring here, what transactions occurring here, but just having an awareness of this. And also noticing that as survival strategies, survival mechanisms, like we covered in Legends of Mr. Singh, immigrant communities coming and what survival strategies are occurring and what they are passing down to their children, and how this can result in dysfunctional behavior generations down the line that are actually not um, useful for them, but were maybe a survival strategy 2-3 generations ago. So it's kind of like that story of I think the grandmother in Thanksgiving, and they were like, "Grandma, why do you, cut the chicken and throw him away when there's enough space in the oven?" And they were like, I don't know, like ask your great grandmother. And he's like, "Great grandma, why do you do that?" "I don't know. Ask your great great grandmother." And of course, let's just say for the story's sake, she's alive. Then the kid's like, "Okay, great great grandmother, why do you cut the chicken in Thanksgiving or turkey and put that in the oven?" And she was like, "Ah, like back when we had, I don't know, like in the olden days, our technology, our oven was so small, and so we had to cut it every Thanksgiving." And so that thought process got carried down, and now they kept doing that until the little child questioned. And the mum said not to question that, but the child actually asked the grandmother, and they called up the previous generations. And so they had a much bigger oven nowadays, right? The whole scenario changed, but the thought pattern was still occurring. So that's a funny story, but you can see how that thought pattern happens in daily life. And so therapy, looking at the past, or coaching, going into the future, looks at these thought patterns that are always occurring. And, just like a DJ, right? You'll interrupt that thought pattern, reflect it back to you, and then, make it go, make the thought reflect on itself, and maybe another thought pattern that's always occurring, reflect on itself further until you're really reflecting on yourself and then forging a new thought pattern. And so the unconscious is becoming conscious. And so you're actually starting to have a more conscious view and starting to consciously create new thought patterns that is coming from a deeper level of yourself rather than unconscious coming from your belief system. So back to transactional analysis. I hope you enjoyed that ramble. I'm going to have some water because I've been talking a lot. Feel free to have some water too, because this is a live stream, so we can relax. There's no editing. Okay. So transactional analysis. So if you're interested in psychology, you'll see that there's a PAC, parent, adult, child. And two adults talking to each other. I like your shirt. Thank you. It's a new purchase. Praise standard, two adults talking to each other, quite aware in the present moment. All good. Person one from the child. OMG, that man on the bus was so rude to me. So again, like the child, feeling like a bit of a victim in that, child state. The parent, forget it. It doesn't matter. Let's go and get a coffee. So, much more critical in nature, much more, um, yeah, just more critical in, parenting. You can get it intuitively, right? I didn't explain that. And it gets quite interesting here because you'll see there's two types of parent. The controlling parent, stop doing that, do this, you know, even when I'm saying that, the tone. So again, like going last time, humans use words and are restricted by words, like in our thinking. So if you're thinking in English, you're going to be restricted by the English thought process. If you're thinking in Chinese, you're going to be restricted by the Chinese process. If you're Duolingo, no, that's an app. If you're bilingual, then you're going to have a greater range of thinking. And so with the words, we're trying to explain the essence that we're feeling subconsciously or consciously to another person, like me to you right now. And the way I do that is encapsulated by words. But I can only express how much that the English language is limited in to you. And whether I'm aware of this or not, that's what I'm doing. And that's why we have art. So like art, like music, we'll get onto this, very fascinating. Art, um, you know, any type of art form. Like in Greece, you have the muses, um, as a way of expressing the very essence of who we are and what we are feeling or thinking subconsciously or consciously to the other person. So where I'm getting with this is that the controlling parent doesn't just say stop this or stop that. It's also the tone which is carried forward. And maybe if you had a critical parent or a critical guardian figure, when I say this stuff, stop this, stop that, you might feel in your stomach a subconscious reaction, right? And that's not just because of the words, it's also because of the tone. And we'll get onto the tone when we talk about music later. Um, and the nurturing parent, it's okay. How can I help you? Like, it's very much nurturing, but it can be over nurturing and smothering. Then you have the adult again in the present moment, and then you have the adaptive child. No, please, can I? Should I do this? Should I do that? They're a bit controlled by the controlling parent. They're adapted child. Then the natural child or creative free child, um, you know, they could be like rebellious as well, or little professor. I wonder, let's try. But more naturally, it's this adaptive child and natural child. Um, so just explaining the ego states there of the parent and the child. And now if you're quite intuitive and you're into programming and stuff, you can imagine how complicated it can get, right? With your ego state playing into each other internally, your different thoughts in the mind, and then your parents interacting with you and the grandparents, and then across all of your generation, across different cultures, there's so many ego states interacting with each other. So you can see it gets like a very complicated web program. And the way to slice through all of these programs and stories that are constructed in belief system is, like I said, in the present moment and always coming back to what we covered first, which was the intuitive mind as the master in this emissary. So, but again, it's useful to understand these belief system and stories and how we begin to construct reality, because when done subconsciously and turning things into labels, these can become destructive and ignorant. But when they are done consciously, we can really create beautiful things with our stories and beliefs, like going to the moon, etc. So let's go into the transactional analysis. So I'm going to give you a sneak peek before I publish on Instagram. This is something that I researched. I read some of Eric Bernie's book, the what do you say after you say hello? And I got some funny looks, when I was traveling in Oban and Iona, up north in Scotland. That's where the Christians first came to Scotland. And I was reading my book up there, and people were like, "What do you say after you say hello?" And I was like, "Hello." But obviously, this title is quite funny, but it's kind of like, what are you programmed to say after you say hello, right? So this is very interesting. Again, the games people play. So parent, the behaviors, thoughts, and feelings copied from parents or parent figures. Adult, the behaviors, thoughts, and feelings, direct response from the present moment, right? So it's not programmed, it's just bam, from the present moment. Probably based on your personality, consciously. And then the child, behaviors, thoughts, and feelings are played from childhood. So that's quite interesting. Copied from parents and parents' figures versus replayed from childhood. So bear that in mind as we go through this. So transactional states, ego states. So let's go a bit more deeper. So we have our parent, and again, we can split that into um, positive and negative, and again, the critical and nurturing. So let's start with the critical: advising, informing, ordering, guiding. When we looked at the big five, we can see these showing up differently. So we can see how diverse it is, right? Because now we've got the big five, we've got personality type, and we've got also which ego state we're working from. So we can see how complex this gets. So yeah, advising, informing, ordering, guiding, right? So you've got a parent and they're like, based on this, I think um, I advise that you go for this, uh, you go for that, and really a good guide. Um, quite a nice parent to have around, and they're taking good care of you. They got you in your best interests. But then the negative, critical, and judgmental, dominant, punishing, maybe condescending. And the child takes that on. So if we just jump to the child very quickly in terms of just fleshing this out, like maybe they're quite dominant. So again, using tone and the words. So I'm going to try to imagine that. It's like, you're not good enough. You can do better. Go away from here. Think very critical and slicing. And so the child subconsciously, um, you know, absorbs that and then plays that out again. There you go. And then we get our positive from the nurturing parent. So they're protective, they're warm, they're supporting, they're loving, encouraging. So again, they're that all-encompassing warmth. They're supportive, they're loving. They're really exuding that warm, motherly almost energy, although it can be fatherly as well. But it's traditionally associated with that, and it's really nurturing. It's kind of like that that gardener. So it's even kind of when I talk to you in this state, it can be from adult, or if I'm more in a teaching mode, if I'm not being too advising or informing, it could be more from that parent nurturing state. So that's in a way that we're using the certain parental states in a good way. It doesn't necessarily have to be towards a child. I can just be using it in that state. And then like protecting, overprotective, smothering, stifling. So again, like from the immigrant community, right? Because I'm speaking from this because I've researched this and um, I'm aware of these transactional analysis from the South Asian community. And so, like if you want your child to do so well and you're scared of them failing, you're going to be looking after them too much and mollycoddling them. And, oops, sorry for these messages. Yeah, you're going to be mollycoddling them too much. You're going to be protecting them. Maybe you're not going to like not make them do their own washing or their own ironing or their own food, or maybe you're going to just do things to them too much, right? And you can start to see why that's happening, coming from maybe fear or their own past and their own childhood. And what was that like? The adult, again, from the present moment, the child, so adapted child. So if it's in a good way, please, can I, do you mind with, if. So, we're respecting people's boundaries. We're socialized in that sense. We're not just marching through people. So if our parent, of course, have set good boundaries with us, then adapted, sullen, helpless, subservient, dejective, defiant, manipulative. So if you think in a work scenario, you might have that victim mentality, oh, I really hate my job, or I'm stuck in this job, and they're helpless, they're powerless, they're trapped. They have the victim mentality. Maybe they have that more child thing. Maybe they're a bit manipulative to try to get their way. They're going through behind people's backs, but they don't really have that positive nature. Maybe again it comes from the parent relationship, where they're very subservient. Maybe they had a very dominant or condescending parent, and so in their life they played out um, un, unconsciously, and they landed themselves in a job role that fit their ego. And so the positive child, they're more free, right? They're excited, they're playful, they're fun, they're creative, curious, loving, animated. So you see that coming out in maybe things like Elon Musk when he's designing his new cars or things. He'll be breaking really the boundaries and the scientific and the social norms. And because there's one thing we have the science and the logic, right? These are all things we can use. But then behind that is restricted by the social norms, which we can think are logical and rational, but it's really not. And so Elon Musk was like, this is not logical, rational. And with that really excited or playful nature, he was really able to take that science and that logic and break these boundaries and create something amazing. So and then that free negative child, that willful, petulant, destructive, wants my own way, like maybe it's like it's not fair, and they're like very destructive and rebellious. um, so not breaking the boundaries, social boundaries, in a more negative way than a positive way, let's say. So now let's look at the interplay between them. So like I said, immigrant family example. So you have a kid, say it's coming from the school or the university, and they're like from adult state, let's say, they're more stable. I don't know what course to pick, and an adult might say, "What do you like?" They'll put it back to them. The child just says, "Free child, do what you love," right? Because they've got that creative spirit. There's no social rules, boundaries, but they're creative and free. Um, but then the adaptive child might say, "Who cares about university?" You know, they're a bit more adaptive. But you can say that's also maybe the free negative child. So depending on the tone and context, you can categorize these. But this is just to give you an example. Then, for example, the critical parent, right? This is very, very classic example. You'll see it in your TikToks with your brown people problems and your wherever the youth use these days, the young youth. You should be doctor, lawyer, engineer, the critical P, right? Because they came, they struggled, they're very industrious in nature. They didn't go much in the nature. They were just always in the shop. They wanted to not fail, and maybe they have a bit of fear, and they know what the society wants, right? So it's very critical. You should be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. So should, it constricts, it's very authoritarian, and it's very critical, and it's society driven. And so that can turn up even in the tone and suggestive ways. And so this is why thought patterns and subconscious is very like that sensitivity we talked about in our big five. This is where it can come in handy to detect these things, not just through what people say, but through the tones, facial expressions, body language, and gestures. And so if that person is triggered, they can say, "Stop controlling me," in a critical parent way, right? Maybe if they were in a less negative, maybe in a more positive way, they could be like, okay, I see that, but, or like, thank you for your suggestion, but it's like, stop controlling me, because you feel controlled, right? Again, the power play, you have that game of power. If you've seen like Robert Greene or any of his books, you'll see that when you're in these ego mind states, it starts about that control game where you have these games and power plays. And so that person feels controlled and stop controlling me. And so Eric Berney says when you have the struck cross transaction, that creates a clash. So you can see, bam, there's a clash, an emotional clash here. But then if we can be in a more conscious state, so again, zooming out, so we have that awareness, like we practice with our attention, and then our attention is there, then we've sacrificed everything for you. Because you can imagine that person really with their belief system coming from another country and thinking that their child is rebellious, and all these subconscious thoughts and emotions from their adult state to their subconscious happening. Bam, we've sacrificed everything from you. But then if we're taking this state, then we're saying, don't worry, I'm okay, you're okay. So we're stepping out of the ego states here, and we're consciously choosing a complementary transaction. And so that just takes out of the power play in the games, because we always get fixated on the power play in the games, especially when you're company setting, you think, how can I leverage this? How can I win in this? How can I get my best out of this? My, or me. But then if we're stepping out of that for a second, and we're looking in the nature point of view, or the a step back, a more detached point of view, then we can start to see, okay, there are certain stories here happening, and they're just a result of the human conditioning. But what's the reality thing? And this is where it gets a bit weird almost. Like, there's a plant over there. It's also living, but this is not generated by stories. That gives us perspective. Then we can see, okay, this is a story that's happening. It may seem true, but it's a Homo sapien construction of reality from our brain. And so let's just say, for argument's sake, there's no good or bad. There's only levels of consciousness. And so we can step a bit out. We've sacrificed everything for you. Okay, there might be different dimensions from this, but the one is the quote, and then one is the tone. So we're just trying to take a step back from that whole subconscious tone, because remember, words, try not to focus them on them too much. They're just an encapsulation of what's happening, of the emotion that's happening behind. When we're talking about in this case, I believe that's, yeah. So that's the transactional analysis part. So I hope you find that very interesting. Now, IFS we covered very, very briefly last time. I think it was the last wisdom exchange. I posted on Instagram. And we'll go a bit more deeper in. This is starting to become a long live stream, but if you're interested, hey, stick with me. And while we're just having a wee break now. I would just say that if you're still here, if you're still watching, and you're interested in this stuff, now's a good time to say that I'm training as a professional coach. In my corporate career, I'm also doing some coaching things, people leadership development, but I'm actually training as a professional coach in, with a professional organization. So if you're interested in personality and going deeper in thought processes, and you're not sure what your goal is, or you just want someone to speak to about the belief system in a non-judgmental and collaborative space, I'm training in these professional psychological and coaching models and tools. So get in touch at Jyoti Video Projects, or coachjyoti@gmail.com. Because I'm in training, I'm offering it for free, completely free. We can talk like this for 1 hour. So yeah, if you're interested, just get in contact, and I'll mention it again at the end. But while you're with me, I thought just to mention that. So let us continue to meet your internal family system. So this is yet another psychological model. We have the self, like we visited right at the start when we did the awareness and meditation exercise. We have the manager. The manager is that critical nature. You'll see similar things cropping up as you explore these things more and more. The critical side, let's say the parent, the firefighter, that more avoidant thing. So, if you go to check your phone in an avoidant way, or can get more serious, like, binging on alcohol or chocolate, and the exile, like, that maybe the anxious part or feeling trapped. But we'll go into that a bit more. And then the self. So, how does these functions work? And how can we recognize these functions? Each part interacts with another within us, playing out in our everyday thoughts, actions, and relationships, by Dr. Richard Schwartz. I think I spelled it wrong here, but anyway, you can type in Richard Schwartz and Dr. Chatterjee. There's an amazing podcast where he goes in very deep into the psychological model, and you can start to understand yourself a bit better. But again, if you're interested, go on my Instagram, like it. It's only got three likes, and more things coming on my Instagram. So the manager, when it's burdened, really feeling that, again, like we looked at that negative, we can see a lot of parallels, right, between that transactional analysis and IFS. Overprotective, not good enough, overpleaser, perfectionist, and really the unburdened version, competent, responsible, creative problem solver. Firefighter, the one that distracts, procrastinates, overindulge, reactive. It numbs, bends, fantasizes, dissociates, is a bit avoidant. But it's more in the present, right? Because it's adventurous, it's creative, it's courageous, it's self-soothing, takes healthy risk, it's humorous. But when it gets burdened, it's trying to sort of avoid the present in not a nice way. And then again, the exile, wounded. It's all in the past. It's wounded. It has trauma. It's needy. It's repressed, dependent. When it's unburdened, it feels these feelings, right? So it's really, it's no. How to explain it? It's like when we're understanding, because when I delve into this stuff first, it didn't seem very logical. And that's because when we go through school and such, when we're studying the sciences, it's very cerebral, it's very logical, especially when we go through university and stuff. We're learning through PowerPoints, but when we're really tapping into the emotional part of us, this different sort of knowledge, the more emotional intelligence knowledge, starts to open up, and there's so much there, and it's so interesting. And when we get that stuff right, it almost enhances the way we use our logic and higher mental processes. So it's really worth to delve into. So again, understand the parts through not just logically, but again, like through meditation, meeting these different parts, the thoughts, the emotions, unburden and harmonizing them. So what we mean by unburden is, again, go through Richard Schwartz's podcasts, because through IFS, there's a journey in how to unburden them step by step. And there's a way to go and meet them subconsciously so you're not triggering them with your attention. So your attention will meet different parts and it will alleviate or unburden first the critical parts. And that will then allow you to go through the more sensitive parts, and that will unburden and harmonize the whole system. So the self, the attention of the self can flow between the two. Whereas when you're meditating, if the attention of the self, um, we're trying to meditate and have this, but if everything's burdened, then the thoughts are coming fast, thick and fast, and it's unharmonized. But when, it's harmonized, we can flow in between these different parts of us in our psychological state. And then noticing, like I mentioned at the start, internal and external reflections become one. Because when we notice the different parts in everyone else, and the different parts in us, we can start to notice the same. Even though they're different personalities, the psychological processes are stacked differently. We can notice, when we become super sensitive, we notice different processes in us are also the processes in others, and noticing the burden in us is the burden in others, and that's the way compassion happens. And then noticing how a society is constructed out of certain parts or certain consciousness or certain unconsciousness. And so that's why I say internal and external reflections become one, because at that fundamental unburden and harmonize level and at the attention of the self, you can start to notice how the self and its parts, how they construct reality and how they relate to each other. And so, yeah, the self, that the attention or the self behind the attention, flow between the parts, the perspective, it was accepting the different parts that we practiced at the start. It was connecting the different parts. It was more intuitive. It was healing that. It was a bit more courageous and fearless. And what I mean by courageous is not like it has that quality, but more like it lacks the fear that the other parts have, because maybe the parts are scared or they have that burden, whereas the self is unburdened itself. So it has that distance. And that's why it looks like it's courageous. But in practical terms, it's more fearless than courageous, if you know what I mean. And it comforts the parts that we did again at the start of the session. And then just showing how religion, it's hard to say religion because religion's almost what happens after the prophet occurs. It's more of the structure that happens. But let's say um, the guide or the guide of the spirituality. So the guides of the spirituality, through their poetry or teachings, how does that match up? So we can say Manjit Jagjit, which literally translates to mind win, world win, or worldly win. So again, like IFS, win the mind, win the world, win the reality almost. And that's from Guru Nanak in the Japji Sahib. So that poetry, it kind of reflects, or does reflect, everything that we've covered so far in just a nice sentence. But it doesn't go into the psychological charts and everything. It's more working on the subconscious. But this is a nice segue into the rags. So I'll take another break because I know that was very heavy in terms of logic, psychology, and stuff. So when I'm speaking this stuff as well, this information can be transferred through art, like art forms, music, in like 10 seconds, right? Whereas me speaking about these things, it takes, an hour or more. That can be covered in different art forms. So this is also the power of art. It can convey such condensed information emotional information in such small amount of time. But my interest lies in teaching about this stuff in more of a logical way, or rather than maybe um, painting a picture. That's just the way my personality is. So, transactional analysis. If you're interested, you can come to this website. Again, it's got different, again, games people play. You're okay. So 1964, 1973. Read through these books if you're interested. I think it's Tim Harris and Bernie. So let us then delve into the arts and farts of the world. So on the left and the right, the left you have the Western musical scale. So if you know do re mi fa sol la ti do, not the best singer, and you have these sharps, majors, minors, and you have that mathematics almost and geometry, musical geometry to express emotion. You have Mozart, Beethoven, your classics of the Western world to convey music, to bring you into this present moment, or to convey emotion. Um, like your symphonies, etc., marching music, all the rest of it. And then, and I covered that in my vlogs, which are still going to come out. So many vlogs to come out. But then, really interestingly, that's going to come very soon. Is going to be my vlog in Himachal, where I talk about a bit more about the Raags and someone I met as well will explain about the Raags and show you how that works. And the Indian system, wow, it's so complicated, so in depth. And he was explaining it to me in contrast to the Western system, where I don't know why, if it's because of the long amount of time that they had to evolve this system, or how the civilization was. But through the day, they kind of create certain moods of ragas, and these ragas are like sa re ga ma pa da ni sa instead of do re from do re mi, and they can be related to times of the day, right? So maybe in the morning time you have this mood, in the afternoon you have this mood, and nighttime, and you have that. It's called like gun or ras, essence, color, flavor of the subconscious, right? So we're really getting arty farty here, intuitive, but you'll really feel, if you're into music, you'll feel that flavor, that essence. Like I said, not the words, but the mood carried behind. So I really want to stress here the granularity of the subconscious and the mood and the flavor and the essence that the Indian musical system is able to convey. And so you'll see all of that complexity, and you'll see names like Vasu, like Brahm, like Agni. I think that means fire, and you get these different spirits that are invoked in the human subconscious. And when you listen to music, sometimes if you're going to the gym, you'll feel pumped. Sometimes you'll feel emotive. And, what is that? Some nowadays we're like, oh yeah, that feels good. But there's something deeper going on here that we're going to explore. So, scientifically, let's look at the two rags, alap and gat. I'm not an expert, right? But this is a paper from Psychology 2015 on the emotional responses to the Indian rag music and the role of musical structure. So you'll see things coming up now in the Western world, like yoga is coming and meditation's coming, music therapy is coming, certain Ayurvedic practices are occurring. I don't know much about these things, but I'm just noticing there's a trend happening. And we can explore the more music side here. So alap, right? Degree of, I assume this is working via like a brain scanner or something, but you'll see alap is really having that calm. You can Google like alap raag or alap kirtan and listen to it and see how you feel, right? So you'll feel they don't feel tensed at all, right? They feel very, very happy, very calm. A little bit of sadness in there, right? There's some longing, there's some devotional aspect. So when you're in touch with your emotions, like we visited the mind and the emotions there, now it's that where we cannot go with logic, the skilled musicians take us there. So it's almost like when we listen to the music, we ourselves cannot reach that emotional state, maybe unless we're in a relationship or something happens. But we can listen to music that reaches emotional states where we've never reached before. And that's cool. And because the rags are so complex and so has that level of granularity, we can reach complex emotional states that we haven't reached before. It's kind of like mathematics, right? You can reach so complicated mathematics, like in terms of Laplace, by taking things into different domains and Fourier transformations. Um, you can reach such a high level of mathematics through people's sort of models, mathematical models, right? So through the musical scales, and they're not strict scales, they're like kind of loose scales, that it's up to their own players understanding and artists understanding and feel and understanding, yeah, of that rag. They can then play within that, but they're still limited in the rag. So we can kind of say it's like sort of personality. Um, but yeah, so the human can almost, so it's so beautiful. It's like mathematics. You can almost touch that level of emotion within you. Um, yeah. So again, um, gut. Now we'll look at gut. So we'll see there's so much more happiness. There's so much more romance here, devotional. So it's interesting because in certain cultures, I would say in Indian culture, they have a lot of this seva or this selfless service or this devotional aspect or this longing. Whereas maybe in more Western cultures, you'll have a different sort of like maybe more logical outlook, and you won't have that more devotional aspect. Yeah, it's quite interesting, but you'll see how different people in different cultures have these emotionalities expressed or not expressed or burdened or unburdened, and it's so really the full wheel of emotions. And so this is super interesting for me personally, right? Because in Sikhism, it's express the shabad or the poetry, like we saw Guru Nanak's poetry. There's different poetry which talks about the the mind and the emotions and the identification of the mind and giving the identification up. And so, like Einstein said, like the aspect of the sorry, yeah, this of losing that identification and coming a bit more detached. And so the poetry reflects that. But then the poetry is compiled in that Guru Granth Sahib holy book into rags. And the rags are quite cool because they get the so the poetry almost talks in a certain way, but the rag pulls you in, it pulls you in emotionally and sort of drowns you emotionally. And I think one of the guys in Nanak Nam, which is a YouTube channel, talks about it quite well. It drowns you in emotionally and gives you a perspective, emotional perspective, and then yeah, and then it gives you insight in that way. So not like maybe coaching, talking. Well, that's good as well in therapy. There's also other ways of coaching in therapy, like music, and so it's really cool that this spiritual text is set in rags and a sort of information that's what I was getting to with the tones and the words. So the information is passed to you in words, but also poetry, like a sort of sweetness that is subconsciously working on these different parts. Not to amplify the identification and ego, but more to detach and make you aware of the ego state. So it's almost like the transactional analysis, but through music and poetry, and making you aware of your own emotional state if you're able to be unidentified and just listen to the music and go there. Um, yeah, super interesting stuff. I think I'm going to leave it there because I know I've been through a lot. We've been through a lot today. But again, if you're interested in any of this, psychology, personality, hunter gatherers, anything like that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see myself. There you go. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, everybody. That was a good Sunday afternoon. I really enjoyed that because I'm super interested in this stuff, and it's really cool to find the depth of this stuff. It's really helping me. I hope it helps other people as well. Like I said, if you're interested in coaching, sitting down for an hour, I've got it here. Subscribe on YouTube. Free one-to-one coaching while I'm in training. You can reach out to me on Instagram at Jyoti Video Projects. You can email me at coachjyoti@gmail.com. I will put I think I have a QR code. There you go. If you got a phone, you can press that. Follow me on Instagram. But everybody, I wish you a really good rest of your Sunday. I hope you enjoy that today. And I will see everybody next time. Where is it? Here we go. Yes, have a good Sunday, everybody. Thank you again for all your support, your liking, your subscribing of the YouTube channel. If you've got any questions, put them down below in the comment section. And I'll see everybody next time. Take care. Bye bye, everyone.